At 0347 hours on March 22, 2024, a six-man Navy SEAL team was 90 seconds away from being eliminated by enemy forces in the mountains of northern Syria. Surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from extraction, they were preparing for their final stand when a single rifle shot changed everything. Fired by a woman who shouldn't have existed, who saved their lives, then disappeared to expose the conspiracy that nearly got them killed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other high-stakes operation for SEAL Team Bravo. Lieutenant Commander Phoenix Drake had briefed his five-man team at Naval Special Warfare Group 2 in Virginia Beach before their deployment to the Syrian-Kurdish border. The mission seemed straightforward. Extract a high-value intelligence asset who'd been feeding information about terrorist supply routes to U.S. forces for 18 months. Petty Officer First Class Jackson Vale, the team's communications specialist, had run final equipment checks while Chief Petty Officer Atlas Gray reviewed extraction protocols with their helicopter crew. Petty Officer Second Class Damon Fields, their medic, packed additional medical supplies, sensing this mission carried higher risks than their typical operations. The intelligence briefing had been thin on details, always a red flag in the special operations community. "Something doesn't feel right about this one," Gray had muttered to Drake as they loaded their gear. The veteran chief had completed over 200 combat missions across 3 deployments, and his instincts rarely failed him. The asset's location keeps changing, our extraction window is too narrow, and the enemy presence estimates seem deliberately vague. Drake shared those concerns but trusted their operational security protocols. SEAL teams operated on compartmentalized intelligence, designed to protect both the mission and the operators. Sometimes incomplete information was simply the price of operational security, rather than evidence of larger problems. The helicopter insertion had proceeded without incident. Their CH-47 Chinook had deposited them at a landing zone 12 kilometers from the target location, allowing for a night approach through terrain that offered multiple concealment options. The team moved with practiced silence through rocky valleys that had hidden fighters for decades, each man carrying equipment that represented millions of dollars in advanced military technology. But as they approached the target coordinates, Vale's encrypted communications gear began receiving conflicting signals. The extraction point had been moved again, the third change since their insertion. More troubling, his equipment was detecting electronic signatures that suggested far more enemy personnel than their briefing had indicated. "Phoenix, we've got a problem," Vale whispered into his throat microphone. "I'm reading at least 40 hostiles in overwatch positions along our planned extraction route. This isn't the light resistance we were told to expect." Drake signaled for the team to take cover while he reassessed their situation. Through his night vision scope, he could see their supposed asset location, a small stone structure built into a hillside that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. But instead of a single intelligence source waiting for extraction, the building appeared to be a fortified position with multiple armed occupants. "This is wrong," Fields observed, studying the structure through his own optics. "That's not a safe house. That's a trap." The realization hit Drake like a physical blow. Someone had fed them false intelligence, drawing his team into a carefully prepared kill zone. The asset they'd come to extract either didn't exist or had been compromised. Either way, 6 of America's most elite warriors were now surrounded by enemy forces who'd had hours to prepare for their arrival. Drake's voice crackled through their communication system. "Movement on all sides. They're closing the circle."
What followed was a textbook example of how quickly special operations could deteriorate from controlled precision to desperate survival. The enemy had positioned fighters along every possible escape route, forcing the SEAL team into an increasingly small defensive perimeter. Their advanced equipment and superior training were being systematically neutralized by superior numbers and prepared positions. Vale's attempts to call for emergency extraction met with radio silence. Either their communications were being jammed, or their support elements had been compromised as well. The team found themselves trapped in a rocky depression, with ammunition running low and enemy forces moving closer under cover of pre-dawn darkness. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they're close enough for coordinated assault," Drake told his team. Each man understood what that meant. Their current position offered minimal cover against attackers approaching from multiple directions. Once the enemy closed within grenade range, the engagement would be over quickly. As if to emphasize their desperate situation, enemy sniper fire began impacting around their position. The shots were precise, professional, and designed to keep them pinned while assault forces maneuvered for final positions. Whoever was coordinating this ambush possessed detailed knowledge of SEAL tactics and capabilities. "Unknown shooter, identify yourself." A voice called out in accented English from somewhere above their position. "Surrender your weapons and you will be treated according to the laws of war." The offer was almost certainly false. Intelligence assets who'd worked with American forces rarely survived capture in this region, and SEAL team members represented even higher value targets for propaganda purposes. Surrender meant torture, execution, and videos that would be used to recruit future fighters. Drake made the decision that every special operations leader dreads but trains for constantly. "We make our stand here. No surrender, no quarter. We take as many of them with us as possible." The team acknowledged the order without discussion. Each Mon began making final preparations, checking ammunition loads and positioning grenades for maximum effectiveness against approaching enemies. They'd trained for this scenario countless times, understanding that sometimes the mission becomes survival, and survival becomes inflicting maximum cost on those who'd betrayed them. But as enemy forces moved into final assault positions, something changed in the pre-dawn darkness. A single rifle shot echoed across the valley, followed immediately by confused shouting from enemy positions above their location. Then another shot, and another. The incoming sniper fire that had kept them pinned suddenly ceased. Enemy voices could be heard calling out in panic, trying to coordinate responses to threats they couldn't identify or locate. Someone else had entered the battle, someone whose capabilities exceeded anything the enemy had prepared to face. Drake raised his head cautiously, trying to understand what was happening around them. Through his night vision equipment, he could see muzzle flashes from positions that hadn't been occupied moments earlier. But instead of additional threats, these new shots seemed to be systematically eliminating the enemy forces that had surrounded them. "Phoenix, this is an unknown friendly," a calm female voice spoke through their encrypted communications channel. "Stay in position. Extraction in progress." The voice was American, professional, and carried the confidence of someone accustomed to impossible situations. But no American forces were supposed to be operating in their area, and their communications channels were encrypted with codes that only their immediate support elements possessed. Who was she? How had she accessed their communications? And how was she single-handedly dismantling an enemy force that had taken hours to position and coordinate? The answers to those questions would prove more disturbing than the ambush itself.
What happened next defined everything Drake knew about battlefield dynamics. The mysterious woman's voice had barely finished speaking when the enemy positions that had surrounded them for hours began falling silent, one by one. Not the chaotic collapse of a retreating force, but the systematic elimination of coordinated threats by someone who seemed to see the entire battle space with supernatural clarity. "Tango down, Northwest Ridge," the unknown voice reported through their encrypted channel. "Moving to secondary targets." Vale frantically worked his communications equipment, trying to trace the signal's origin. "Phoenix, she's not transmitting from any known friendly position. The signal strength suggests she's mobile, but I can't get a fix on her location." Drake found himself in the surreal position of coordinating with a ghost. "Unknown friendly, what's your tactical assessment? We have limited ammunition and no extraction timeline." "Negative on ammunition concerns. Your resupply is en route. Focus on identifying enemy command elements." Before Drake could ask how she knew their ammunition status, a small package landed in their defensive position with pinpoint accuracy. Inside were fresh magazines for each team member's weapon, medical supplies that exactly matched their needs, and communication equipment that shouldn't have existed outside classified military research facilities. Fields examined the medical supplies with growing amazement. "These aren't standard issue. Half of this gear is experimental trauma treatment that I've only seen in medical journals.
How did she know exactly what we needed? The answer came in the form of continued precision elimination of enemy forces. Through his night vision scope, Drake began to understand they weren't just being rescued, they were receiving a masterclass in advanced combat operations. The unknown woman wasn't just shooting targets, she was systematically dismantling the enemy's command structure, communication networks, and escape routes. Enemy sniper team eliminated. Forward observers neutralized. Command post compromised. Gray, with decades of special operations experience, had never witnessed anything comparable. She's not just hitting targets randomly, she's reading their entire tactical organization and eliminating key nodes to collapse their capability. Each shot seemed to serve multiple purposes, eliminating immediate threats while disrupting coordination between remaining enemies, creating confusion that prevented organized responses while opening evacuation routes for the trapped SEAL team. It was tactical thinking that operated on levels most military professionals never achieved. Unknown friendly, request identification for our after-action report, Drake transmitted. The response carried hints of amusement. Call me Raven. Official identification can wait until you're safely extracted. As dawn began illuminating the Syrian mountains, the scope of their mysterious allies' capabilities became even more apparent. She had somehow positioned herself with perfect fields of fire, covering multiple approaches to their position. More improbably, she seemed to anticipate enemy movements before they occurred, engaging targets that hadn't yet become threats to the SEAL team. Vale managed to establish partial tracking of her transmissions. Phoenix, she's moving between positions faster than should be possible. Either she's got transportation we can't detect, or she's predicting exactly where she needs to be for each engagement. The tactical mystery deepened when Raven began providing intelligence that exceeded anything in their mission briefing. She identified enemy reinforcement routes, predicted their arrival times, and described weapons capabilities with precision that suggested extensive preparation. Incoming mortar team from your southeast, distance 800 meters. They're carrying 82mm rounds with contact fuses, neutralizing now. Drake watched through his scope as muzzle flashes appeared from positions that provided perfect angles against threats his team couldn't even see yet. It was as if Raven possessed real-time intelligence on enemy movements throughout the entire operational area. "How long have you been tracking this situation?" Drake asked during a brief lull in the engagement. "Long enough to know you were walking into a trap. Your mission intelligence was compromised before you left Virginia Beach."
The implication hit the team like cold water. Someone with access to their operational planning had deliberately fed them false information. This wasn't just an ambush, it was betrayal by their own support systems. Fields voiced what they were all thinking. If our intelligence was compromised, how many other teams are walking into similar traps? Before Raven could respond, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the valley. But instead of the friendly extraction they'd been expecting, Vale's equipment identified the aircraft as enemy attack helicopters moving to reinforce the ground assault. 2 MiG-24 Hinds inbound, armed with anti-personnel rockets. Raven's voice carried new urgency. Your extraction window is closing rapidly. Drake realized their situation had just escalated beyond conventional small arms engagement. The enemy helicopters carried enough firepower to eliminate their position regardless of how well they'd been defending it. Against aircraft, their small arms were virtually useless. "Unknown Raven, we need immediate extraction or air support. We cannot engage helicopter gunships with current equipment." "Understood. Adjusting tactical priorities." What happened next would be discussed in classified debriefings for months afterward. Instead of attempting to engage the helicopters directly, Raven began targeting ground-based elements that the aircraft relied on for coordination. Spotters providing targeting information, communication relays directing the air attack, and fuel supplies that extended the helicopter's operational time. The first helicopter pilot, suddenly cut off from ground coordination, began flying erratic patterns as he tried to re-establish contact with his controllers. The second aircraft, lacking precise targeting information, circled the area without engaging, unwilling to risk friendly fire against his own ground forces. Phoenix, marking your extraction point with green smoke. Friendly aviation inbound in 90 seconds. Drake had never requested extraction support, and their communications with base had been cut off for hours. How had she coordinated air support that his team couldn't access? The answer came in the form of two AH-64 Apache attack helicopters that appeared over the ridgeline with precise timing. The American aircraft immediately engaged the enemy helicopters with overwhelming firepower, ending the air threat within minutes. As a UH-60 Black Hawk landed at the designated extraction point, Drake gathered his team for movement to the helicopter. But first, he tried one more time to establish contact with their mysterious savior. Raven, request meetup for extraction. You've earned a ride home. The response was barely audible over the helicopter noise. Negative. Different mission parameters. Stay safe, Phoenix. As their Black Hawk lifted off, Drake caught a glimpse of movement on a distant ridge. A lone figure, barely visible through the morning haze, watching their extraction. Then she was gone, disappeared into a terrain that had hidden fighters for generations. During the flight back to base, Vale worked frantically to analyze the communication equipment Raven had provided. Phoenix, this gear is at least 5 years ahead of anything we've been issued. The encryption protocols aren't in any military database I can access. Gray was studying the ammunition they'd been resupplied with during the engagement. These aren't standard military rounds, custom loads optimized for extreme accuracy and reduced noise signatures. Whoever she is, she's got access to equipment that doesn't officially exist. As their helicopter approached friendly airspace, Drake realized they'd been rescued by someone who operated according to capabilities and resources that exceeded normal special operations. Raven wasn't just an exceptional operator. She represented access to systems and support that suggested connections far beyond conventional special operations. The question that would haunt their debriefings was simple but disturbing. If Raven could access their encrypted communications and coordinate air support that their own command structure couldn't provide, who was she really working for? And more importantly, why had she been in position to save them unless she'd known about the trap in advance?
12 hours after their extraction from the Syrian mountains, Drake found himself sitting in a sterile debriefing room at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, facing questions that had no satisfactory answers. Captain Sterling Wade, their commanding officer, had flown in from Virginia Beach specifically for this session, accompanied by Major Sage Reeves from Naval Intelligence, a woman whose reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths made even experienced operators nervous. "Let me understand this correctly," Captain Wade said, consulting his notes with obvious frustration. "An unknown individual with access to your encrypted communications, advanced military equipment, and apparent coordination with air assets that we have no record of deploying, single-handedly eliminated approximately 40 enemy combatants and extracted your team from what you describe as certain death?" Drake nodded, knowing how impossible it sounded. "Yes, sir. That's an accurate summary." Major Reeves leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "And this individual identified herself only as Raven and provided no military identification, unit designation, or authorization codes?" "Correct, ma'am. She appeared to have detailed knowledge of our mission parameters, enemy dispositions, and capabilities that exceeded our own intelligence briefings." The debriefing room fell silent as Wade and Reeves exchanged glances that suggested private conversations had already taken place about this incident. Vale, Gray, and Fields sat around the conference table, each man studying the advanced equipment that Raven had provided during their engagement. "About this equipment," Reeves continued, gesturing toward the communication gear and ammunition samples they'd brought back. "Our technical analysis indicates manufacturing standards and capabilities that aren't consistent with any known military contractor or research facility.
Grace spoke up from the far end of the table. Ma'am, with respect, that equipment saved our lives. Whatever its origin, it performed flawlessly under extreme conditions. I'm not questioning its effectiveness, Chief. I'm questioning how someone operating independently gained access to technology that officially doesn't exist, and why she was in position to intervene in your mission unless she had advanced knowledge of your operational plans. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. If Raven had known about their mission beforehand, it suggested either breach of operational security or connections to intelligence systems that she shouldn't have been able to access. Drake found himself defending someone he'd never met. Major, regardless of how she obtained her information, her intervention prevented the loss of a 6-man SEAL team. Her actions were consistent with supporting American forces, not compromising them. Were they? Reeves opened a classified folder and spread several photographs across the table. These are satellite images of your operational area taken 6 hours before your insertion. Notice anything unusual? The team studied the images carefully. Vale was the first to spot the discrepancy. There's a vehicle here that wasn't in our pre-mission intelligence photos. And these positions, someone had prepared overwatch locations that would provide perfect fields of fire over our planned route. Exactly, Reeves confirmed. Someone with access to your mission planning had pre-positioned assets in that area. Either Raven was part of the trap that nearly killed you, or she was conducting unauthorized surveillance of American special operations. Fields looked up from examining one of the photographs. Ma'am, if she was part of the trap, why would she risk exposing herself to save us? It would have been easier to let the ambush succeed. Unless, Reeves continued, saving you served a larger purpose that we don't yet understand. Captain Wade took control of the briefing again. Here's what we know for certain. Your mission intelligence was compromised. The asset you were sent to extract either never existed or was used as bait to draw you into a prepared kill zone. Someone wanted that SEAL team eliminated, and they used our own operational planning to make it happen. Drake felt his stomach tighten. Sir, are you suggesting this was an inside job? I'm not suggesting anything, Commander. I'm stating facts. Your mission briefing contained information that was later used against you by hostile forces. Either we have a security breach in our operational planning, or we have personnel deliberately sabotaging SEAL operations.
The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Military operations depended on trusted intelligence and secure communications. If either system was compromised, every mission became a potential death trap for American forces. Major Reeves continued her analysis. What makes this particularly concerning is that similar incidents have been reported by other special operations units over the past 6 months. Teams receiving intelligence that leads them into prepared ambushes, only to be extracted by unknown individuals with capabilities that exceed conventional military resources. Vale sat up straighter. Other teams have encountered Raven? We don't know, Reeves admitted. The individual or individuals involved never provide identification, and they disappear immediately after successful extractions. But the pattern is consistent. Compromised missions, trapped American forces, and rescue by someone with access to equipment and intelligence that officially doesn't exist. Gray's experience in special operations made him ask the critical question. Ma'am, what's the common thread between these compromised missions? Same intelligence sources? Same operational commanders? Same support elements? Reeves exchanged another meaningful glance with Captain Wade before answering. That's what we're trying to determine, but preliminary analysis suggests the compromises occur at levels that would require significant security clearances and access to multiple operational databases. Drake realized they were discussing potential treason by senior military or intelligence officials. So whoever is setting up these ambushes has access to our most sensitive operational planning? That appears to be the case, and whoever is conducting these extractions has access to resources that suggest connections to classified military programs or foreign intelligence services with sophisticated capabilities. The briefing continued for another hour, covering technical details of the equipment Raven had provided, analysis of her tactical methods, and speculation about her possible identity and affiliations. But no clear answers emerged, only a growing sense that they'd become involved in something far more complex than a simple rescue operation. As the session concluded, Captain Wade addressed the team directly. Everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels. You will not discuss these incidents with personnel outside your immediate team, and you will report any attempts at unauthorized contact regarding this mission immediately. "Sir," Drake asked, "what happens if we encounter Raven again?" Wade's expression was grim. "You follow standard procedures for unidentified personnel in operational areas. Challenge for identification, and if none is provided, treat the contact as potentially hostile until proven otherwise." "Even if she's saving American lives?" Fields asked. "Especially then," Major Reeves interjected. "Someone with her capabilities who operates outside official channels represents either a significant security breach or a foreign intelligence operation designed to gain our trust before exploiting it." As the team filed out of the briefing room, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been rescued by someone who understood threats to American forces better than the officials responsible for protecting them. But he also realized that Raven's intervention had raised questions about institutional security that went far beyond a single mission in Syria. Walking across the base towards their temporary quarters, Vale voiced what they were all thinking. "Phoenix, what if she's not the problem? What if she's trying to protect us from the real problem?" Drake had been wondering the same thing. If military operations were being systematically compromised, and if unknown individuals were risking their lives to save American forces, it suggested a conflict between official channels and unofficial guardians that most military personnel never suspected existed. The question that would haunt his thoughts for weeks was simple but disturbing. In a war between official authority and unofficial protection, which side was actually serving American interests? And more importantly, what would happen to SEAL teams like his if their unofficial guardian decided the risks of continued intervention exceeded the benefits of protecting forces that officially didn't trust her?
3 weeks after their Syrian extraction, Drake's team was conducting training exercises at the Naval Special Warfare Compound in Virginia Beach when the impossible happened again. They were running advanced marksmanship drills on the facility's long-range shooting course when a voice they recognized spoke through their training communications system. "Your elevation calculations are off by 2 minutes of angle," Raven's unmistakable voice said calmly. "Wind speed has shifted since your last measurement." Drake immediately scanned the area around the shooting range, looking for any sign of an observer. The facility was secure, surrounded by multiple layers of security that should have prevented unauthorized access. Yet somehow, Raven was watching their training and had accessed their encrypted communication channels again. "Raven, identify your position," Drake transmitted. "You're in a restricted military facility." "Negative on position disclosure. Focus on your shooting fundamentals." "Chief Gray, your breathing rhythm is causing vertical dispersion in your shot group." Gray looked up from his rifle scope, amazement replacing concentration. "She's right. I've been rushing my respiratory pause." He made the adjustment Raven suggested, and his next 5 shots formed a tight cluster that would have been impossible with his previous technique. Over the next hour, Raven provided instruction that transformed their shooting capabilities. She didn't just correct their mistakes, she explained the underlying principles that most military snipers never fully understood. Wind reading techniques that accounted for terrain features miles away from the target. Atmospheric pressure calculations that considered altitude variations across bullet trajectory paths. Equipment modifications that improved accuracy without appearing in any official manual. Vale worked frantically to trace her transmission source while receiving instruction on communication security protocols that weren't taught in military schools. Phoenix. She's not just monitoring our radios, she's demonstrating encryption methods that are decades ahead of current military standards. Fields, receiving advanced trauma treatment techniques between shooting exercises, made an observation that disturbed the entire team. She's not just teaching us better ways to do things we already know, she's teaching us capabilities that officially don't exist. The training session continued until sunset, with Raven providing individualized instruction to each team member based on their specific strengths and weaknesses. She demonstrated tactical innovations that addressed problems they hadn't even realized they faced, equipment modifications that solved operational challenges they'd accepted as unavoidable limitations. Most remarkably, she began teaching them to recognize signs of compromised operations before they became life-threatening situations. Environmental indicators that suggested prepared ambushes, communication patterns that revealed intelligence breaches, behavioral analysis techniques for identifying personnel who might be feeding information to hostile forces. "Why are you teaching us this?" Drake asked during a brief pause in the instruction. "Because the next time you walk into a trap, I might not be in position to extract you. You need to recognize threats that come from inside your own support systems." Gray understood the implication immediately. "You're saying our own people are setting us up?" "I'm saying that some of your missions are being compromised by individuals with access to your operational planning. Whether that's intentional betrayal or systemic security failures, the result is the same: American forces walking into prepared kill zones." The instruction shifted to counterintelligence techniques that weren't part of standard SEAL training. How to verify mission intelligence through independent sources, methods for detecting surveillance by friendly forces who might not be friendly, communication protocols that could maintain operational security even when official channels were compromised. Fields raised a question that had been bothering all of them. If you know our operations are being compromised, why don't you report it through official channels? Raven's response carried undertones of bitter experience. "I tried that approach. Official channels are often part of the problem." As darkness fell over the training facility, Raven's instruction became even more specific and disturbing. She began describing actual operations where SEAL teams had been given false intelligence, complete with names, dates, and outcomes that matched classified after-action reports none of them should have been able to access.
Operation Midnight Falcon, 18 months ago, she said. SEAL Team Charlie was told they were extracting a high-value target from a terrorist compound in Iraq. Instead, they walked into a meeting between American intelligence officers and arms dealers who were selling weapons to the same terrorists SEALs were fighting. Vale's equipment analysis had confirmed something that made the team deeply uncomfortable. Phoenix, the communication gear she provided in Syria, it's designed to intercept and decode military encryption protocols. She's not just monitoring enemy communications, she's monitoring ours. The realization that Raven possessed capabilities to surveil American forces raised questions about her ultimate loyalties. Was she protecting them from external threats or gathering intelligence for purposes they didn't understand? "Raven, what's your operational authority?" Drake asked directly. "Who authorized you to conduct surveillance on American special operations?" Her response revealed the first hints of personal motivation behind her interventions. No one authorized it, no one had to. When you watch American soldiers die because someone sold their operational plans for money, authorization becomes irrelevant. Gray, with decades of military experience, recognized the tone of someone who'd witnessed betrayal from within the system they'd sworn to serve. "You're not active duty, are you? You're operating independently." Former Army Rangers, discharged under circumstances that officially never happened. Current status? Concerned citizen with specialized skills and access to information that most people prefer to ignore. The training session concluded with Raven providing them with secure communication protocols and dead drop procedures for sharing intelligence that couldn't be transmitted through official channels. She also gave them techniques for conducting independent verification of mission intelligence before deployment. Use these methods to cross-check your next operational briefing. Compare official intelligence with open-source information, social media analysis, and local news reports from your target areas. Inconsistencies often reveal deliberately false information. As their unauthorized instructor prepared to disconnect from their communication system, Drake made one final attempt to understand her motivations. "Raven, what do you want from us? What's your endgame?" Her response would haunt their future operations. "I want SEAL teams to stop dying because corrupt officials are trading their lives for money. I want you to survive long enough to expose the people who are using America's elite warriors as expendable assets in their personal profit schemes." The communication channel went silent, leaving Drake's team alone with knowledge that made their profession infinitely more dangerous and complex. They'd been trained to fight external enemies, but Raven was teaching them to recognize and defend against threats from within their own support systems. Vale was studying the communication equipment Raven had provided when he made a discovery that changed everything. Phoenix. This gear doesn't just intercept communications, it records them. She's been documenting evidence of the corruption she's describing. Fields examined medical supplies that had been left at their training position during the instruction session. These aren't just advanced trauma treatments, they're designed specifically for injuries caused by weapons that American forces shouldn't be encountering in current operational areas. The implications were clear and disturbing. Raven wasn't just teaching them improved tactical techniques, she was preparing them for betrayals that she'd already witnessed and documented. American forces were being deliberately exposed to threats that served someone's interests other than national security. As they secured their equipment and prepared to leave the training facility, Grave voiced what they were all thinking. "She's not just trying to keep us alive, she's recruiting us to help expose whatever conspiracy she's uncovered." Drake realized they faced a choice that would define their careers and possibly their lives. They could report Raven's unauthorized contact and return to conventional operations, trusting official channels that might be compromised, or they could accept her training and begin operating with the assumption that some of their greatest threats came from within their own support systems. The decision would prove easier than expected when their next mission briefing contained exactly the kind of inconsistencies Raven had taught them to recognize.
2 days after their unauthorized training session with Raven, Drake's team received orders for immediate deployment to Kurdistan. The mission briefing seemed routine. Provide Overwatch security for a diplomatic convoy traveling through territory controlled by Kurdish forces allied with American interests. Standard protection detail that any SEAL team could handle with minimal risk. But as Drake studied the operational parameters using techniques Raven had taught them, inconsistencies began emerging that transformed a simple security mission into something far more sinister. The convoy's route took them through areas where Kurdish forces had reported no recent hostile activity. Yet their intelligence briefing warned of elevated terrorist threats that required maximum security precautions. The diplomatic personnel they were protecting had no scheduled meetings with Kurdish officials, despite the convoy's destination being a Kurdish administrative center. Most troubling, their extraction protocols had been changed twice since the initial briefing, each revision extending their exposure time in potentially hostile territory. Vale used Raven's verification techniques to cross-reference their mission intelligence with open-source information from Kurdistan. Phoenix. Local news reports show that area has been completely pacified for 6 months. No terrorist incidents, no Kurdish military operations, no diplomatic tensions. Our briefing makes it sound like we're entering an active combat zone. Gray's analysis of their equipment assignments revealed another red flag. We're being issued communication gear that's 2 generations behind current standards. If we encounter problems, our ability to call for support will be severely limited. Fields discovered that their medical supplies had been reduced below standard allocations for overseas deployments. They're expecting us to operate with minimal trauma treatment capabilities in an area our briefing describes as high threat. That's not consistent with proper mission planning. Using counterintelligence methods Raven had demonstrated, Drake began identifying personnel who had access to their operational plans. The results were disturbing. Their mission had been reviewed by officials who had no operational need for that information, forwarded through channels that bypassed normal security protocols, and modified by individuals whose previous assignments suggested connections to private military contractors. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The team found themselves facing an impossible decision. They could deploy according to orders, knowing their mission parameters showed signs of deliberate compromise. Or they could refuse deployment based on intelligence analysis that officially didn't exist, potentially facing court-martial for insubordination. Drake made a choice that would have been unthinkable before their encounters with Raven. He initiated contact using the secure communication protocols she'd provided, hoping their mysterious guardian was monitoring American operations in Kurdistan. Raven, this is Phoenix team, requesting assessment of current operational parameters. The response came within minutes, confirming their worst suspicions. Phoenix, your mission intelligence contains multiple fabricated elements. The convoy you are assigned to protect is carrying weapons and communication equipment to Kurdish separatist groups that are hostile to American interests. Your security detail is designed to provide legitimacy for arms transfers that violate international law. Vale's equipment analysis had revealed modifications to their communication gear that would prevent them from reporting unauthorized activities they might witness during the convoy mission. She's right, Phoenix. This equipment isn't just outdated. It's been modified to limit our ability to transmit certain types of information. Raven continued her assessment with details that proved access to classified intelligence sources. The diplomatic personnel you're protecting are actually private contractors working for Crimson Tide contractors. They're using official diplomatic credentials to transfer weapons to Kurdish groups who will use them against Turkish forces, creating instability that benefits American defense contractors seeking long-term military contracts in the region. The revelation that their mission was actually arms trafficking, disguised as diplomatic security, represented a level of corruption that challenged everything they believed about their service. American Special Operations Forces were being used to facilitate illegal weapons sales that would ultimately result in increased conflict and instability. Gray's voice carried the anger they all felt. So, we're not protecting American diplomats. We're providing security for arms dealers who are using our credentials to legitimize illegal weapons transfers?
Correct, Raven confirmed. And when Kurdish separatists use those weapons against Turkish military forces, the resulting diplomatic crisis will require increased American military presence in the region, generating billions in defense contracts for the companies that orchestrated this operation. Drake realized they were witnessing the mechanics of how military-industrial corruption operated at the highest levels. Defense contractors were creating conflicts that required American military intervention, then profiting from the contracts needed to manage those conflicts. SEAL teams like his were being used as unwitting facilitators of a system designed to generate perpetual warfare for private profit. "What's our alternative?" Drake asked. "If we refuse this mission, they'll just send another team that doesn't know what they're walking into." Raven's response revealed the depth of planning behind her interventions. You deploy as ordered, but you carry additional communication equipment that will allow independent verification of convoy activities. Document everything, transmit evidence through secure channels, and be prepared for extraction when the arms transfer is exposed. Fields understood the implications immediately. You're asking us to conduct an undercover investigation of our own mission. I'm asking you to gather evidence that will prevent future SEAL teams from being used as unwitting accomplices to arms trafficking operations. The evidence you collect will expose the entire network of officials who are using American Special Operations as cover for illegal activities. Over the next several hours, Raven provided them with equipment and techniques for conducting covert documentation during their deployment. Miniaturized recording devices that could capture conversations and activities without detection. Communication protocols for transmitting evidence to secure servers that couldn't be accessed by the officials who had compromised their mission. Methods for maintaining operational security while gathering intelligence on the people who were supposed to be supporting them. Most importantly, she provided them with legal protections through connections to congressional oversight committees and military justice advocates who could ensure their evidence would be properly investigated rather than suppressed.
Your mission parameters require you to follow orders and provide security for the convoy, Raven explained. My parameters require you to document activities that violate American law and military regulations. Both missions can be accomplished simultaneously if you're properly prepared. Vale realized they were being recruited into a larger investigation that extended far beyond their individual team. How many other SEAL operations are being compromised for private profit? Based on my analysis of mission patterns over the past 2 years, approximately 30% of special operations deployments involve some level of manipulation by private contractors seeking to create conditions that benefit their business interests. Arms sales, construction contracts, security services, logistical support, all requiring ongoing military presence that generates steady revenue streams. The scale of corruption Raven described was staggering. Nearly 1/3 of American special operations missions were being influenced or manipulated by private interests that profited from continued military engagement. SEAL teams were being deployed not to serve national security objectives, but to create market conditions that benefited defense contractors. Gray asked the question that would define their future service. If we expose this network, what happens to the officials who've been facilitating these operations? That depends on how comprehensive the evidence becomes and whether enough military personnel are willing to testify about what they've witnessed. Corruption at this level requires institutional accountability, not just individual prosecutions. As their deployment time approached, Drake realized they were about to participate in an operation that would either expose systematic corruption or result in their own elimination by the people they'd trusted to support them. The mission had become a test of whether American special operations could police itself when official oversight had been compromised. Their equipment now included devices that would document everything they witnessed during the convoy mission, communication systems that would transmit evidence to congressional investigators, and extraction protocols that would protect them if their investigation was discovered by the wrong people. Walking toward their departure aircraft, Vale voiced what they all understood. We're not just deploying to Kurdistan, we're deploying to gather evidence that could bring down senior military and intelligence officials. Drake nodded, understanding that their service to their country now required investigating the people who claimed to speak for their country. It was a mission that Raven had prepared them for, but one they would have to complete on their own, knowing that their greatest threats might come from the support systems they'd always trusted to protect them.
The convoy mission began exactly as Raven had predicted. Drake's team arrived in Kurdistan to discover their diplomatic personnel were actually private contractors carrying weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian supplies. The vehicles they were protecting contained advanced military communication equipment, night vision systems, and ammunition that would be transferred to Kurdish separatist groups operating against Turkish military positions. Within hours of their deployment, Drake activated the covert recording equipment Raven had provided, documenting conversations that revealed the true scope of the operation they'd been assigned to protect. Quote, Phase 1 delivery includes 50 encrypted communication systems, one contractor explained to his Kurdish contact. These will allow coordination of operations against Turkish border installations without detection by NATO monitoring systems. Close quote. Vale, monitoring communications using Raven's advanced equipment, intercepted transmissions that proved the weapons transfers were designed to escalate regional conflicts. He called Phoenix, they're not just selling weapons, they're providing tactical planning for attacks on Turkish military facilities. The implications were staggering. American SEAL teams were providing security for operations that would directly result in attacks on NATO ally forces. Turkish military personnel would die from weapons and intelligence provided under cover of American diplomatic credentials. Gray's analysis of the Kurdish recipients revealed another disturbing pattern. These aren't Kurdish officials or legitimate military commanders. Half of these people have connections to groups that have conducted terrorist attacks against civilian targets. Through their concealed recording equipment, they documented meetings where Crimson Tide contractors explicitly discussed how increased Kurdish-Turkish conflicts would generate defense contracts worth billions of dollars. American military presence would be required to manage the escalating situation, creating long-term revenue streams for the private companies orchestrating the instability.
Quote, once Turkish forces respond to Kurdish attacks with increased border operations, Congress will authorize expanded military presence in the region, close quote, a senior contractor explained during a recorded conversation. Our company has exclusive contracts for base construction, logistics support, and security services. Every escalation in regional tensions translates directly into increased revenue. Fields documented medical supplies being transferred alongside weapons shipments, supplies that would treat injuries caused by the weapons being provided. He said, quote, they're profiting from both creating casualties and treating them. It's a complete cycle of engineered conflict, close quote. As the convoy continued through Kurdish territory, Drake realized they were witnessing the mechanics of how private military contractors manufactured conflicts that required American military intervention. The pattern was elegant in its cynicism. Create instability, profit from managing that instability, then create additional instability to ensure continued profitability. Their secure communication with Raven provided real-time analysis of the evidence they were gathering. Quote, Phoenix, your documentation is confirming connections to 17 other operations where similar weapons transfers preceded regional conflicts that required increased American military presence. Close quote. Vale's equipment had intercepted communications between the contractors and senior military officials who were coordinating these operations from Washington. Quote, Phoenix, we're recording conversations with people who have access to the highest levels of defense planning. This corruption goes all the way to the Pentagon, close quote. Recorded conversations revealed that Admiral Knox Harper, a senior naval intelligence official, had been coordinating with Crimson Tide contractors for over 2 years to identify opportunities for profitable conflicts. SEAL teams, Marine units, and Army Special Forces were being deployed to provide security and legitimacy for operations that primarily served private corporate interests. Quote, Admiral Harper has been selecting deployment targets based on their potential for creating instability that benefits our partner companies, close quote, one recorded conversation revealed. Gray understood the full implications of what they were documenting. He said, quote, they're using American Special Operations as a business development tool for defense contractors. We're not serving national security, we're serving corporate profit margins. During the third day of their convoy mission, Drake's team encountered direct evidence of how their documented arms transfers were being used. Kurdish separatists, equipped with the weapons and communication systems they'd helped deliver, conducted coordinated attacks on 3 Turkish military outposts along the border.
The attacks killed 17 Turkish soldiers and wounded 32 more, using tactics and equipment that had been provided under cover of American diplomatic credentials. Turkish officials immediately accused Kurdish forces of receiving advanced military support from unknown sources, escalating tensions throughout the region. Vale intercepted Turkish military communications describing the weapons used in the attacks. Phoenix, they're identifying American-manufactured equipment with serial numbers that match the shipments we protected. Turkish intelligence knows American weapons killed their soldiers. Within hours, Turkish forces began mobilizing for retaliatory operations against Kurdish positions, exactly as the contractors had predicted and planned. The escalating conflict would require American diplomatic intervention, military presence, and security services that would generate massive contracts for the companies that had orchestrated the crisis. Raven's analysis of their evidence confirmed the systematic nature of the corruption they'd uncovered. Phoenix, your documentation proves that Crimson Tide contractors and Admiral Harper have used similar methods to create conflicts in 7 different regions over the past 3 years. Estimated total value of defense contracts generated through these operations exceeds $12 billion. Fields made a discovery that transformed their understanding of how widespread the corruption had become. Phoenix, the medical supplies we documented being transferred, they included treatment protocols for injuries caused by specific weapons systems. These contractors are so confident in their ability to create conflicts that they're pre-positioning medical care for the casualties they know they'll cause.
The convoy mission concluded with Drake's team having documented irrefutable evidence of systematic corruption that extended from private contractors through senior military officials to the highest levels of defense planning. But their evidence also revealed that exposing this network would implicate dozens of officials and potentially compromise ongoing military operations around the world. As they prepared for extraction from Kurdistan, Raven provided them with secure transmission protocols for delivering their evidence to congressional investigators who could initiate formal proceedings. Phoenix, your documentation will trigger the largest investigation of military corruption in American history. Be prepared for institutional resistance from officials who have been facilitating these operations. Vale realized the scope of retaliation they might face for exposing the network they documented. Phoenix, if Admiral Happer and Crimson Tide contractors have been manipulating special operations for 3 years, they have connections throughout the military and intelligence communities. Exposing them means making enemies at the highest levels of government. Drake understood that transmitting their evidence would end their conventional military careers, but remaining silent would make them complicit in the systematic betrayal of American forces and allies. The choice between personal safety and institutional accountability had become unavoidable. As their extraction helicopter approached the landing zone, Drake initiated the secure transmission protocols Raven had provided, uploading their evidence to servers that would automatically distribute the documentation to congressional oversight committees, military justice advocates, and investigative journalists. "Evidence package transmitted," he reported to Raven. "What happens now?" Her response confirmed that their documentation had triggered investigatory processes that were beyond anyone's ability to stop or control. "Phoenix, your evidence is now in the hands of people who can act on it. Within 72 hours, Admiral Harper will be suspended pending investigation, Crimson Tide contractors will lose their government contracts, and congressional committees will begin reviewing every special operations mission approved over the past 3 years. Gray asked the question that would define their immediate future. "What about our team? We're witnesses to activities that implicate senior officials in systematic corruption." Raven's answer revealed the protection protocols she'd established for military personnel who gathered evidence of institutional corruption. "Phoenix, you're entering witness protection programs administered by congressional investigators and military justice advocates. Your service records will be classified, your identities protected, and your testimony will be central to prosecuting the officials who have been betraying American forces." As their helicopter lifted off from Kurdish territory, Drake realized they were no longer just Navy SEALs completing a mission. They had become the primary witnesses in an investigation that would expose how American military power had been systematically corrupted by private interests seeking profit from perpetual conflict.
48 hours after Drake's team transmitted their evidence from Kurdistan, the retaliation began with surgical precision. Admiral Knox Harper, facing imminent investigation for systematic corruption, activated networks that had been protecting illegal military operations for years. Instead of allowing congressional oversight to proceed, he chose to eliminate the witnesses who threatened to expose decades of profitable betrayal. Drake's team had been relocated to a secure facility outside Washington, D.C. for debriefing when Vale's monitoring equipment detected unauthorized surveillance of their location. Phoenix, were being tracked by multiple teams using military-grade equipment. This isn't standard witness protection. Someone's hunting us. Major Sage Reeves, who had been coordinating their witness protection, received intelligence that confirmed their worst fears. Your evidence triggered emergency response protocols among the officials you exposed. Instead of accepting investigation, they've classified your team as a national security threat that requires elimination. The transformation from protected witnesses to hunted targets happened with bureaucratic efficiency that revealed how thoroughly the corruption had penetrated official channels. Admiral Harper had convinced senior officials that Drake's team had been compromised by foreign intelligence services, justifying their elimination as counterintelligence operations necessary to protect national security. Gray understood the implications immediately. They're going to kill us and claim we were foreign agents. Our evidence will be dismissed as enemy disinformation, and the corruption network will remain intact. Fields discovered that their medical records had been altered to suggest psychological instability that would discredit any testimony they might provide. They're not just trying to eliminate us physically, they're destroying our credibility so our evidence becomes worthless. Through secure channels, Raven provided real-time intelligence on the forces being deployed against them. Phoenix, Admiral Harper has authorized 3 separate elimination teams using personnel from Crimson Tide contractors. Official military units have been told you're rogue operators who stole classified information for foreign governments. The teams hunting them possessed detailed knowledge of their capabilities, training, and psychological profiles, information that could only have come from their own military personnel files. Officials who had sworn to protect them were now providing intelligence to facilitate their assassination. Vale's analysis of the elimination teams revealed sophisticated coordination between military and private contractor resources. Phoenix, they're using active duty military personnel alongside Crimson Tide operatives. This isn't just corporate security, this is official military action disguised as counterintelligence. Drake realized they were experiencing the same systematic betrayal that had been used against countless other military personnel who had threatened the corruption network. The pattern was consistent: classify witnesses as security threats, authorize their elimination as counterintelligence operations, then dismiss any evidence they'd gathered as enemy disinformation. Major Reeves provided them with intelligence that revealed the scope of Harper's retaliation campaign. 17 other military personnel who had gathered evidence of corruption had been eliminated over the past 2 years. All were classified as foreign agents or psychologically unstable individuals who posed security risks. Raven's communication confirms that Drake's team had become part of a larger conflict between institutional corruption and individual accountability that most military personnel never realized existed. Phoenix, you're fighting a shadow war that's been ongoing for decades. Officials like Harper have been eliminating military personnel who threaten their profit margins while maintaining official legitimacy through national security classifications. The first elimination team found their safe house location within 6 hours of beginning their search. Drake's team barely escaped through extraction protocols Raven had established, but the attack confirmed they were facing lethal force authorized at the highest levels of military command. They're not trying to arrest us or neutralize us. They're trying to kill us and destroy all evidence that we ever existed. Gray's analysis of their pursuers revealed military tactics and equipment that confirmed official authorization for their elimination. These aren't rogue contractors. These are active military units operating under direct orders to eliminate American citizens without trial or due process.
Fields made a discovery that revealed how thoroughly their identities had been compromised. Phoenix, our service records have been classified beyond congressional access. Officially, we no longer exist as military personnel. We've been erased from every database that would prove we had legitimate authority to gather the evidence we transmitted. Through encrypted channels, Raven provided them with intelligence on Admiral Harper's broader campaign to eliminate witnesses and suppress evidence. Phoenix, Harper has convinced senior officials that congressional investigation of military corruption represents foreign infiltration of American oversight systems. He's authorized elimination of congressional staff, military prosecutors, and investigative journalists who have accessed your evidence. The revelation that their evidence had triggered systematic elimination of multiple civilians and military personnel transformed their understanding of the stakes involved. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were protecting everyone who had tried to investigate the corruption they'd exposed. Vale intercepted communications between elimination teams that revealed the extent of resources being deployed against them. Phoenix, they've authorized unlimited funding and personnel for our elimination. This isn't just about suppressing our evidence. It's about sending a message to anyone else who might consider exposing corruption. Drake understood that surviving their current situation required more than just evading immediate threats. They needed to gather additional evidence that would make their elimination counterproductive for the officials hunting them. Raven's analysis provided the strategy they needed. Phoenix, Admiral Harper's elimination campaign has created evidence of systematic assassination of American military personnel and civilians. Document everything about how they're trying to kill you, and that evidence will be more damaging than your original documentation of arms trafficking. Over the following days, Drake's team used Raven's surveillance equipment to document their hunters, recording conversations between elimination teams that proved official authorization for assassination of American citizens. The evidence revealed that Harper's network had been systematically murdering military personnel for years while maintaining official legitimacy through false national security classifications. They've killed 47 military personnel and 23 civilians over the past 3 years, Raven reported after analyzing their documentation. Your evidence of the elimination campaign will expose not just arms trafficking, but systematic assassination of American citizens by their own military officials. Gray realized they had inadvertently gathered evidence of crimes that extended far beyond corruption into organized murder of military personnel and civilians. Phoenix, we're not just witnesses to arms trafficking anymore. We're documenting genocide against American military personnel who threatened private corporate profits. As elimination teams continued hunting them across multiple states, Drake's team systematically documented every aspect of the campaign designed to kill them. Their evidence revealed how military resources were being used to assassinate American citizens while maintaining official legitimacy through false national security justifications. Fields understood that their survival had become secondary to ensuring their evidence reached investigators who could act on it. Phoenix, if we die, this evidence has to survive. Too many people have been murdered for us to let this network continue operating. Vail's communication with congressional investigators confirmed that their documentation of the elimination campaign had triggered federal law enforcement involvement that Admiral Harper couldn't control or suppress. Phoenix, FBI counterintelligence divisions are investigating systematic assassination of American military personnel. Admiral Harper's network is being exposed faster than they can eliminate witnesses. Through secure channels, Raven provided them with evidence that their survival had enabled exposure of corruption and assassination networks that have been operating within American military systems for decades. Phoenix, your documentation has triggered investigations that will result in hundreds of prosecutions and complete restructuring of military oversight systems. Drake realized their mission had evolved from gathering evidence of arms trafficking to exposing systematic assassination of American military personnel by officials who had sworn to protect them. The stakes had become much higher than their individual survival. They were protecting the integrity of American military service itself.
6 weeks after Admiral Knox Harper's elimination campaign began, Raven made a decision that would expose the entire corruption network to global scrutiny. Instead of continuing to protect Drake's team through covert operations, she chose to reveal everything through simultaneous press conferences in Washington, London, and Geneva, supported by documentation that had been gathering for 3 years. The international media conference began at 1400 hours Eastern Time, broadcast across multiple networks and streaming platforms. Raven appeared in person for the first time since her initial intervention in Syria, but now she wore civilian clothes and spoke as Staff Sergeant Raven Thorne, former Army Ranger and current civilian investigator of military corruption. My name is Staff Sergeant Raven Thorne, discharged from the United States Army under circumstances that were classified to prevent exposure of systematic corruption within American military operations, she began, her voice carrying the same calm authority Drake's team remembered from their darkest moments. I am here today because Admiral Knox Harper and his associates have been using American Special Operations Forces to facilitate arms trafficking, create profitable conflicts, and assassinate military personnel who threaten their operations. The evidence she presented was devastating and comprehensive. Audio recordings of Admiral Harper coordinating with Crimson Tide contractors to manipulate SEAL deployments for corporate profit. Video documentation of weapons transfers that had resulted in attacks on NATO allies. Financial records proving that Harper had received over $12 million in payments from defense contractors whose profits depended on continued regional instability.
Most damaging were the intercepts of communications between elimination teams that had been hunting Drake's team, complete with authorization codes that proved official military sanction for assassination of American citizens without trial or due process. Over the past 3 years, Admiral Knox Harper's network has murdered 47 military personnel and 23 civilians whose evidence threatened to expose systematic corruption within American military operations, Raven continued, her voice carrying the same calm authority Drake's team remembered from their darkest moments. I'm here today because Admiral Knox Harper and his associates have been using American Special Operations Forces to facilitate arms trafficking, create profitable conflicts, and assassinate military personnel who threatened their operations. The evidence she presented was devastating and comprehensive. Audio recordings of Admiral Harper coordinating with Crimson Tide contractors to manipulate SEAL deployments for corporate profit. Video documentation of weapons transfers that had resulted in attacks on NATO allies. Financial records proving that Harper had received over $12 million in payments from defense contractors whose profits depended on continued regional instability. Most damaging were the intercepts of communications between elimination teams that had been hunting Drake's team, complete with authorization codes that proved official military sanction for assassination of American citizens without trial or due process.
European Parliament members demanded investigation of NATO military operations that might have been compromised by similar corruption. United Nations investigators announced comprehensive reviews of peacekeeping missions that had been supported by private military contractors whose profits depended on continued instability. During the press conference, Raven revealed the full extent of surveillance and documentation that had made her interventions possible. For 3 years, I have been monitoring American military operations that showed patterns consistent with deliberate compromise. I documented 47 separate incidents where SEAL teams, Marine units, and Army Special Forces were deployed to missions that primarily served private corporate interests rather than national security objectives. Her evidence included detailed analysis of how defense contractors had been systematically creating regional conflicts by providing weapons to multiple sides in existing disputes, then profiting from American military presence required to manage the instability they had created. The business model was elegant in its cynicism, Raven explained. Create conflict, profit from managing that conflict, then create additional conflict to ensure continued profitability. American Special Operations Forces were being used as unwitting facilitators of a system designed to generate perpetual warfare for private profit. The press conference concluded with Raven providing secure channels for other military personnel who had witnessed similar corruption to provide testimony without fear of retaliation. Within 48 hours, over 200 active duty and former military personnel had contacted investigators with evidence of additional corruption that extended the investigation to operations in 17 countries. Major Sage Reeves, speaking from FBI headquarters, confirmed that the investigation triggered by Drake's team and coordinated by Raven had uncovered systematic corruption that compromised approximately 30% of American military operations over the past 5 years. The evidence provided by Staff Sergeant Thorne and Phoenix team has revealed the largest military corruption scandal in American history, Reeves announced. The investigation will result in comprehensive reform of oversight systems, prosecution of hundreds of officials, and complete restructuring of relationships between military operations and private contractors. 3 days after the press conference, Drake's team emerged from witness protection to testify before congressional committees investigating military corruption. Their evidence, combined with Raven's documentation, provided irrefutable proof of how American military power had been systematically corrupted by private interests seeking profit from manufactured conflicts. But perhaps most importantly, their testimony revealed how individual military personnel could recognize and resist corruption when official oversight systems had been compromised. The techniques Raven had taught them for verifying mission intelligence and documenting suspicious activities became standard protocols for all American Special Operations Forces. Vail's analysis of the investigation's scope revealed how thoroughly the corruption had penetrated American military systems.
Admiral Harper's network had been operating for over a decade, manipulating military operations in 43 countries and generating over $50 billion in defense contracts through manufactured conflicts. As the congressional hearings continued, Gray provided testimony about the psychological impact of discovering that their service had been corrupted by officials they had trusted. Learning that your missions were designed to serve corporate profits rather than national security challenges everything you believe about military service. But exposing that corruption becomes a different kind of service to your country. Fields described the medical evidence that had helped expose the systematic nature of the corruption. When you find medical supplies specifically designed to treat injuries from weapons that American forces shouldn't be encountering, you realize that someone has been planning conflicts and profiting from the casualties they cause. Through secure communications, Raven continued coordinating with congressional investigators and international law enforcement agencies as the investigation expanded to include defense contractors and military officials in multiple countries. Her evidence had triggered the largest international investigation of military corruption in modern history. The woman who had started as an unknown voice, saving a trapped SEAL team in Syria, had become the central figure in exposing systematic betrayal of American military personnel by the officials sworn to protect them. Her intervention had evolved from tactical rescue operations to strategic transformation of military accountability systems worldwide.
8 months after Admiral Knox Harper's arrest, the trials that would reshape American military accountability began in federal courtrooms across Washington, D.C. The evidence gathered by Drake's team and systematically documented by Raven had produced the largest military corruption prosecution in American history, with 127 defendants facing charges ranging from arms trafficking to conspiracy to commit murder. Drake found himself testifying as the government's primary witness in proceedings that attracted international attention. His account of the Syrian ambush that had initiated their involvement with Raven provided the foundation for prosecuting officials who had been systematically betraying American forces for private profit. Admiral Harper knew our mission intelligence was false, Drake testified before a packed federal courtroom. He had authorized the false information that sent our team into a prepared kill zone, then attempted to eliminate us when we gathered evidence of his corruption network. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the audio and video recordings that Raven's equipment had captured during their Kurdistan deployment. Jurors listened to conversations where Harper explicitly discussed how Kurdish-Turkish conflicts would generate billions in defense contracts and how American casualties were acceptable costs for maintaining profitable military operations. Vale's testimony revealed the technical sophistication of the corruption network. They weren't just manipulating individual missions. They had systematically compromised communication systems, intelligence databases, and operational planning procedures to ensure American forces would be deployed according to corporate profit projections rather than national security needs. The evidence presented during the trials exposed corruption that extended far beyond Harper's immediate network. Defense contractors in 17 countries had been coordinating to manipulate military conflicts, ensuring that American and NATO forces would be required to manage instability that the contractors themselves had created. Gray's testimony about the medical supplies that had been pre-positioned for conflicts the contractors had planned proved particularly damaging. They were so confident in their ability to manufacture wars that they were stockpiling trauma treatment supplies months before the conflicts began. They knew exactly how many casualties their weapon sales would cause. Fields provided medical analysis that connected specific injuries treated by American military medical personnel to weapons that had been transferred through operations like their Kurdistan mission. We were treating Turkish soldiers who had been wounded by American weapons that we had helped deliver to the groups that attacked them. We were simultaneously creating casualties and providing medical care for them. The international scope of the prosecutions revealed how thoroughly military corruption had penetrated Allied defense systems.
European prosecutors presented evidence of NATO military operations that had been compromised by similar networks, resulting in coordinated trials across multiple countries that exposed systematic manipulation of international security operations. French investigators revealed that weapons provided through diplomatic channels had been used in conflicts across North Africa, generating over €8 billion in defense contracts for companies that had orchestrated the instability. German prosecutors documented similar operations in Eastern Europe that had created conditions justifying increased NATO presence and defense spending. British intelligence officials testified about surveillance operations that had detected systematic coordination between American defense contractors and international arms dealers who were profiting from manufactured conflicts in regions where British forces were deployed. The evidence presented during the trials transformed public understanding of how defense contractors had been manipulating international conflicts for profit. What had appeared to be natural regional tensions were revealed as carefully orchestrated business strategies designed to generate perpetual revenue from military operations. Raven's testimony provided the comprehensive analysis that connected individual incidents to systematic patterns of corruption. Over 5 years of surveillance, I documented 847 separate incidents where military operations were manipulated to serve private corporate interests rather than national security objectives. Her evidence included financial analysis showing that defense contractors had generated over $127 billion in revenue from conflicts they had systematically created or escalated through weapon sales and intelligence manipulation. The business model was comprehensive: create conflicts through weapons sales, profit from managing those conflicts through defense contracts, then ensure continued profitability by preventing resolution of the conflicts they had created.
The trials revealed that Harper's network had been operating for over 15 years, manipulating military deployments in 43 countries while maintaining official legitimacy through national security classifications that prevented oversight or investigation. Major Sage Reeves, now serving as the government's coordination prosecutor, presented evidence that the corruption network had been responsible for over 2,400 American military casualties and approximately 15,000 civilian deaths in conflicts that existed primarily to generate corporate profits. These weren't combat casualties in service of American national security, Reeves testified. These were murders committed to maintain revenue streams for private companies that had infiltrated and corrupted American military planning systems. The prosecution's case included testimony from 89 active-duty military personnel who had witnessed similar corruption in their own operations, demonstrating that Harper's network represented systematic institutional betrayal rather than isolated criminal activity. Congressional testimony revealed that the corruption had compromised approximately 38% of American military operations over the past decade, affecting deployments in every major theater of operations and resulting in systematic exposure of American forces to unnecessary dangers for private profit. The defense arguments attempted to characterize the operations as legitimate business relationships between military officials and private contractors. But the evidence of systematic deception and assassination of witnesses proved that the network had operated with full knowledge that their activities constituted treason and murder. Harper's own recorded conversations, captured by Raven's surveillance equipment, included explicit acknowledgement that he was betraying American forces. Quote, "Sometimes you have to sacrifice soldiers to maintain the larger business relationships that keep defense spending flowing. Individual casualties are acceptable costs for systemic profitability," end quote. The jury deliberations lasted 11 days, during which additional evidence emerged of international coordination between Harper's network and similar corruption systems in allied countries. The verdicts, when announced, reflected the comprehensive nature of the betrayal that had been exposed. Harper received life imprisonment without parole on 47 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, plus additional sentences for arms trafficking, treason, and racketeering that would have totaled over 400 years in prison. 17 other military officials received sentences ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment.
23 executives from Crimson Tide contractors and related companies received similar sentences, with their companies facing financial penalties that totaled over $89 billion in restitution to victims and forfeiture of profits from illegal operations. The international prosecutions resulted in 312 additional convictions across 14 countries, effectively dismantling defense contractor networks that had been manipulating military operations on a global scale. But perhaps most significantly, the trials established legal precedents that fundamentally reformed military oversight systems. New protocols required multiple independent verifications for all military deployments, financial audits of all contractor relationships, and protected channels for military personnel to report suspected corruption without fear of retaliation. Drake's testimony during the final phase of the trials addressed the broader implications of what they had exposed. Quote, "The corruption we documented wasn't just about money or weapons sales. It was about the systematic betrayal of military personnel who had sworn to serve their country, only to discover that their service was being sold to private companies that viewed their lives as expendable resources." End quote. Vail's technical analysis had been incorporated into new communication security protocols that prevented unauthorized access to military operational planning. Quote, "The systems Admiral Harper used to compromise our missions have been completely redesigned to ensure that private contractors cannot access operational intelligence or manipulate mission parameters for corporate benefit." End quote. Gray's experience had been used to develop new training protocols that taught military personnel to recognize signs of compromised operations. Quote, "Every special operation team now receives instruction in identifying mission parameters that suggest manipulation by private interests. The techniques Raven taught us are now standard training for all American military personnel." End quote. Field's medical documentation had led to new protocols for tracking weapons and medical supplies that prevented their use in unauthorized operations. Quote, "We now have comprehensive systems for monitoring how military equipment is used, ensuring that American resources cannot be diverted to operations that serve private profit rather than national security." End quote. As the trials concluded and sentences were implemented, the scope of institutional reform that resulted from their investigation became clear. The corruption network that had operated for over a decade had been completely dismantled, replaced by oversight systems designed to prevent similar betrayals of American military personnel.
2 years after the trials concluded, Drake stood before a new class of Navy SEAL candidates at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, teaching courses that hadn't existed before Raven's intervention transformed military education. The classroom walls displayed photographs from their Syrian mission, the Kurdistan operation, and the congressional hearings that had reshaped American military accountability. Today, we're going to discuss the most important skill you'll develop as a SEAL, Drake began, addressing young faces that carried the same determination he remembered from his own early training. Learning to distinguish between missions that serve American interests and missions that serve private profit disguised as American interests. The curriculum he taught had been developed directly from techniques Raven had demonstrated during their encounters: environmental analysis for detecting prepared ambushes, communication security protocols that prevented unauthorized access to operational planning, intelligence verification methods that could identify deliberately false information before deployment. Most importantly, the course taught ethical decision-making frameworks for situations where official orders conflicted with constitutional obligations to protect American forces and interests. Vail, now serving as a senior instructor in military communication security, had incorporated Raven's advanced technical knowledge into standard training protocols. Every SEAL team now operates with equipment and techniques that can detect compromise of their mission parameters, he explained to congressional oversight committees. The capabilities that seemed supernatural when Raven first demonstrated them are now standard operating procedures for all American Special Operations Forces. Gray had transitioned to intelligence analysis, using his experience with corrupted operations to train military personnel in recognizing systematic betrayal before it resulted in casualties.
The pattern recognition skills Raven taught us have been systematized into comprehensive training programs, he reported. Military personnel now learn to identify the warning signs that indicate their missions are being manipulated by private interests. Fields had become a specialist in medical intelligence, developing protocols that tracked weapons and medical supplies to prevent their use in unauthorized operations. We now maintain comprehensive databases that monitor how military equipment is used worldwide, he testified. The pre-positioning of medical supplies for conflicts that defense contractors plan to create is no longer possible. The institutional reforms triggered by their investigation had fundamentally transformed American military operations. Multi-source verification was now required for all deployments. Financial relationships between military officials and private contractors were subject to continuous audit. Most significantly, protected channels existed for military personnel to report suspected corruption without fear of retaliation. But the most important change was cultural. Military personnel now understood that their highest obligation was to constitutional principles rather than to any individual who claimed authority to speak for those principles. The blind obedience that had enabled Harper's network to operate for years had been replaced by informed accountability that questioned suspicious orders. 6 months into his teaching assignment, Drake received an encrypted message through channels that had become familiar over the past 3 years. The communication was brief but significant. Mission parameters complete, transitioning to advisory status. Thank you for carrying the truth forward. Drake understood that Raven was formally concluding her role as an active guardian of American military operations. The systems she had helped create were now functioning independently, staffed by personnel who understood the importance of vigilance against institutional corruption.
Through secure channels, Major Sage Reeves provided updates on the continuing effectiveness of the reformed oversight systems. Corruption attempts are now detected and stopped before they can compromise operations, she reported. The protocols developed from Raven's methods have prevented 47 separate attempts to manipulate military deployments for private profit over the past 18 months. The international impact of their investigation continued expanding as allied nations implemented similar reforms. NATO military operations now included multiple verification protocols designed to prevent manipulation by private contractors. United Nations peacekeeping missions were subject to enhanced oversight that made systematic corruption virtually impossible. European military academies had incorporated their case study into standard curriculum, teaching officers to recognize and resist corruption that could compromise military effectiveness. Asian allies had requested American assistance in developing similar accountability systems for their own military operations. Drake's teaching responsibilities included regular briefings for congressional oversight committees, ensuring that civilian leadership understood the ongoing importance of the reforms that had emerged from their investigation. Corruption in military operations isn't a problem you solve once, he explained during one such briefing. It's a challenge that requires permanent vigilance and systematic accountability. During one of his advanced classes, a student asked the question that defined the entire experience. Instructor Drake, what would have happened if Raven had never intervened in Syria? Drake considered the question carefully before responding. Harper's network would have continued operating, manipulating military deployments for private profit while systematically eliminating personnel who threatened their operations. American forces would have continued dying in conflicts designed to generate corporate revenue rather than serve national security. Vale, guest lecturing on communication security, provided the technical perspective. Without Raven's intervention, we would never have developed the detection capabilities that now protect all American military operations. The corruption network would have continued compromising approximately 40% of our deployments. Gray's analysis revealed the broader implications. Based on historical patterns, Harper's network would have been responsible for approximately 8,000 additional American casualties over the following decade, plus tens of thousands of civilian deaths in conflicts manufactured for private profit. Field's medical analysis was equally sobering. The weapon sales and conflict generation that Raven helped expose would have resulted in humanitarian crises across multiple regions, creating refugee populations and destabilizing entire governments to maintain profitable military operations.
3 years after their Syrian extraction, Drake received an unexpected package through official military mail. Inside was a single photograph showing a woman in civilian clothes teaching young people in what appeared to be a conflict resolution workshop in Eastern Europe. The woman's face was partially obscured, but Drake recognized the focused intensity and purposeful movements immediately. Below the photograph was a handwritten note that said, "Different uniform, same mission. Teaching others to recognize and prevent conflicts before they require military intervention. Thank you for ensuring the lessons learned will continue protecting those who serve." Drake placed the photograph in his office next to images from their Syrian mission and congressional testimony. Together, they represented the evolution of military service from unquestioning obedience to informed accountability that served constitutional principles rather than individual authority.
His students noticed the new addition to his display case, prompting questions about the identity of the woman in the photograph. Drake's response captured the essence of what they had learned from their encounters with Raven. She represents the understanding that the most important battles are often fought to protect the integrity of the institutions that serve others, rather than to serve the interests of individuals who control those institutions. The final encrypted message Drake received from Raven arrived on the 5th anniversary of their Syrian extraction. Phoenix Team's legacy extends far beyond individual service. Every military operation now benefits from accountability systems that protect American forces and interests. Mission accomplished through collective commitment to truth over convenience. 5 years later, Drake was promoted to senior instructor and given responsibility for developing ethical training protocols for all American Special Operations Forces. The assignment was recognition of his role in transforming military education from technical instruction to comprehensive preparation for service that included moral courage and institutional accountability. In his new position, Drake established the Phoenix Training Institute, named to honor the team that had risen from potential destruction to expose systematic betrayal of American military personnel. The institute provided specialized education for military personnel who demonstrated exceptional commitment to serving constitutional principles over institutional convenience. The Institute's curriculum was based entirely on principles that Raven had demonstrated: comprehensive environmental analysis, independent verification of mission parameters, recognition of corruption patterns, and moral courage to act on evidence of institutional betrayal. Students at the Phoenix Training Institute learned that exceptional military service often required questioning authority, verifying information independently, and accepting personal risk to protect the integrity of American military operations. The techniques that had seemed supernatural when Raven first demonstrated them became standard capabilities that every graduate possessed. As Drake reviewed graduation ceremonies for the Institute's first class, he reflected on how completely their profession had been transformed. Military personnel now operated with comprehensive understanding that their ultimate loyalty was to constitutional principles rather than to any individual who claimed to represent those principles. The unknown shooter who had saved their lives in Syria had become a teacher whose influence shaped every aspect of American military service. Her legacy was measured not in confirmed eliminations or impossible shots, but in the systematic prevention of betrayals that had cost thousands of American lives. Raven had found her perfect mission, not eliminating threats after they emerged, but teaching others to recognize and prevent those threats before they could compromise American forces or interests. The Guardian had become a teacher, and her students were carrying forward principles that would protect military personnel for generations. In the end, the most important shot Raven had ever taken was the decision to trust others with the knowledge needed to continue her mission.
The impossible had become possible. The teacher had become a legacy, and the mission to protect American military integrity would continue as long as people understood that the greatest threats often came from within the systems they trusted most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.